Hello friends, today we shall discuss key elements of effective communication. My name is Dr. Jyoti Doley. I am an Associate Professor in Communicative English in the School of Applied Science and Humanities, Haldia Institute of Technology, Haldia. Before we go ahead, let us understand the objective of today's presentation. First, we shall understand what communication is and also understand the importance and impact of communication. As we go ahead, we shall also understand the complex process of communication and how time and space determine our feedback. We shall also discuss the barriers to communication and how to overcome them. And lastly, we shall also understand the scope for developing communication styles. The purpose of communication. We communicate to change in the current state. We also communicate to bring about a change in opinion. Sometimes we communicate to give and receive instruction. Communication helps us to broaden our perspectives. It motivates us to do well. We also communicate to earn goodwill of people. Now let me just explain in brief how communication can bring about a change in the current state. Let me give you an example. When we read books or when we read a book, what do we get? We come to know about a story, the plot of a story. We also come to know about a new knowledge, maybe in a more specific and explained way. So it moves us from the process of not knowing to knowing something. And the state of ignorance is gradually changed towards awareness. So communication is a very important tool in bringing about a changing state. Or we can also take an example of when a group of students are demotivated, are not ready to work, right? Not ready to work hard. Now, if a teacher goes there and acknowledges the good qualities in them and encourages them to use those good qualities as their tool in gaining better opportunities, they will be motivated. Now, hence, what do we see? Communication is helping us in changing the current state. Communication also helps us in opinion, in building opinion, in changing opinion as well, right? When we do not have the full information, when we do not have the complete knowledge about something, there will be high chances that we might build an opinion about anything. It could be about a person or an event or even a situation. Hence, when we communicate with other people, when we even read books or periodicals or news, right? When we engage ourselves in discussions, our opinions might change. It can broaden our perspective. So changing opinion also is based on broadening of our perspective, the way we look at things. Sometimes we use communication to receive and give instruction. It is important, say for example, like you need some direction or route direction. So when you communicate your issue, the person concerned will give you the instruction that will help you in finding your direction. So it helps us in giving and receiving instruction. I would like to reiterate this point, broadens our perspective. We have to understand one thing, that human beings are social beings and each of us have our own perspective, and our perspectives are built on the community, the culture, the historical background, geographical location, the school where we have studied, Everything comes into play in order to create a perspective of our own. Hence, even people within the family, within the same space, can have different perspective. So, when we interact with other people, we understand other opinions, others' point of view, which again helps us in broadening our perspectives. As I told you in the first point, the change in current state, so communication actually helps us in motivating to do well, right? Whatever we do currently or whatever we are doing currently, we can do better. It gives us that scope. And how do we understand that we can do better? It's only when we interact with people, when we observe our own action, when we observe others' actions, the manner in which we, handle situation, people, and issues. That also adds to our knowledge base. And last but not the least, communication helps us in earning goodwill of people. Yes, as we communicate, we do not communicate with objects. We communicate with human beings of flesh and blood. Human beings have this innate ability to feel, understand, right? So as we communicate, we also must understand that the person with whom I'm communicating is another human being who is made of flesh, flesh and blood. So the moment I acknowledge the existence of the other person, I am giving the utmost respect to another human being. So the moment I acknowledge the existence of the other human being, automatically I will be empathetic. I will be kind, compassionate, and be polite. So whenever we talk about speaking with people politely, and if we act to be polite, it will not work. Politeness, warmth, and compassion, they all come from within. It comes from the thought that we are communicating with someone who is just like us. Whatever could hurt us might hurt the other person. So when we take care of this, our communication becomes smooth and more effective. Now, before we move ahead again, let's understand what the theorists have to say. David Crystal and R. Worley mentioned very clearly that communication is the sending and receiving of messages. It refers to any messages, not just the highly structured symbolic messages of language. So whenever we talk about communication, it does not mean some very heavily structured with very high sounding words. It could just be simply a note. It could just be simply a sound, or it could just be a simple question, how are you? Now, there are so many things involved. Let me give you this example of how are you. Now, when we say how are you, it carries a lot of weight. It depends upon the relationship that the speaker has with the receiver or the listener. The meaning will come out from that. So what we have to understand, the meaning of our communication comes from the relationship and the context that we are in. So for example, like if I meet a very good friend of mine after a long time, and if I just utter this word, how are you? It will be very, very emotional for that matter, because I know this friend of mine must have undergone some ordeal, or we have not seen each other for a long time, and there are a lot of things that I want to share with this person, and I say, how are you? Now, Again, in a different context, if I say, how are you? Right? My tone is completely different. I say, how are you? Which means that in this context, the person to whom I'm talking might have done something which I'm aware of, and I'm kind of hinting that to this person and say, how are you? After partying the entire night, so how are you? Or after committing something which is this person is not supposed to, and I've come to know about it, and I'm asking, how are you? How are you coping with whatever you have done? So now this two tonality in my voice is very clearly projecting the state in which I am and my intention of talking. When I say how are you, it's not just I'm asking the question how are you. The intention in the first case, like how are you, my intention is to tell the person I care, I've missed you, and I want to know about you. In the second case, my intention is not just about care, it's about telling the person that, see, I know what you did, and I know how are you, what you are doing. So here the intentions are too different, quite different. But then the utterance is the same, how are you? So that is what David Crystal and R. Worley very clearly said, that even if our messages are highly structured with beautiful words, right, it will express the same meaning that I wish to say, and it is equivalent of the question like how are you, right? So what is important here is it is the intention. Hence, whenever we communicate, we must pay attention not just to the words but to the tone in which it is being spoken to me, and also a little bit of attention to the gestures, the body language, which we shall discuss in my next coming slides. So they have given this beautiful diagram made by Roman Jakobson. Now we have the addresser. Addresser is the encoder or the sender of the message. And this person sends the message keeping in mind the situation in which the message is being sent. And what is the message? Who is the person? Context is who is the person to whom I'm sending the message? And what kind of language am I using in order to send that message? And hence it reaches the addressee or the receiver. Now, when I say for example, like if I have to, express my sadness in the sudden demise of a very close friend's parent, then will I say, oh, wonderful, so you have lost your father. Okay, I hope you're coping. All the best. Would I talk to my friend like that? Or would I say, I'm profoundly saddened to hear about the demise. I'm really sorry. Where are you? How did it happen? Can I come and see you now? Now, if you look at the tone in which I have sent the message to my receiver or to my friend, it will have some impact because I know what is the context. The context is that my friend has lost his father. Hence, my message has to capture that moment. And as I create that message, I also have to consider the fact that this person, my target audience, is my friend. And hence, I will use a language, the code, that will clearly express what I feel currently at the moment. And one thing, let me tell you, whenever we communicate, we communicate as per the context, the situation, and the relationship that I share with my target audience. Now, if you pay a bit of attention to the Indian context, we understand that uh, we can very clearly understand the manner in which we address the people who are close to us. Say, for example, like aap, tum, tu. Can I share what I share with the person who I address aap in the same manner that I address that I share with a friend, right, who I address to as tu? Can I share the same kind of joke that I share with a person who I address to and share the same kind of joke with someone who I address up? I will not be able to do that. It clearly projects one thing, that our relationship, right, defines the manner in which we communicate. Transactional model of communication. This is the latest theory that talks about communication as a transactional process. All the previous theories were emphasized that communication flows in a linear pattern. But then Dean Berland in 1970 theorized that no, communication is a transactional process and it moves in a cyclical pattern. Now, this transactional model of communication tries to understand that communication occurs and in the social, relational, and cultural context. So here, what we see, the theorists have acknowledged the context, the social patterns, the social fabric, relationship of the communicator and the listener, and the culture in which they belong to, the situation where they are in. And transactional model of communication also emphasized that communication helps us to create relationships, form intercultural alliances. It also shapes self-concept. Now, this is for the first time people found out that it is not our style of communication strongly is based on the self-concept. Our self-concept. If we are confident, our communication will be clear. If we are clear with our thought, the manner in which I will communicate will be very, very clear. This transactional model of communication also emphasized that communication that occurs in dialogue helps in creating communities, strong, confident communities built on trust. Ways through which we communicate. We communicate through two ways, spoken words and written text. And there are non-verbal cues as well. Sign, cultural insignia, popular signs, socio-legal signs, then body language, tone, touch, space. So, these all come under the compact theory of non-verbal communication, and which I'll explain in the compact. K stands for kinesics, that refers to communication through our gesture, body posture, and facial expression. So, for example, like opening a door for an elderly person or someone very younger to you, it reflects your attitude towards the other person. It is not necessary whether the person is related to you or not, but a simple gesture of kindness can make a lot of difference. So when we talk about kinesics, it is about the body posture, gesture, and even facial expression. So we have to be very careful with our body posture. So for example, like you're attending a lecture in the auditorium and you slouch on your chair or you fidget with your mobile phone, that will show that you're not interested, and that can in fact have a negative impact on the speaker. So we have to be very careful with our facial expression, body posture, even gesture. Oculesics. It stands for expressing through your eyes. Remember, eyes don't lie. You might smile, you might blabber a lot, but when the person looks into your eyes, and if you cannot meet the person's gaze, there could be some issues. So remember, be very clear with your eye contact. It speaks a lot about your confidence. It speaks a lot about your intention. Proxemics. P stands for proxemics. It is about a sense of a person's physical distance. And so we have public space, that is maintenance of public space. Like in a public sphere, a space of 12 feet is, more than 12 feet is expected, or we often find ourselves in such space. Say for example, like there's a meeting, the audience, between your audience and you, automatically 12 feet, more than 12 feet of distance is meant, and it should be appreciated because it helps in addressing the people without without crossing the personal boundary. Then social space, that is in your professional sphere, in your college, there could be many students or many classmates of yours with whom you may not be very, very friendly or very close, but you know them by their face or their name, and when you meet, you just wave hi. So in the social space, say for example in the college playground, when you go for some games, you just wave your hands and say hi to one another and then leave. Personal space is a space in which you maintain the distance of 1.5 to 4 feet. That means you're close to that person. That person is your friend. Or it could be that it could be your space between your siblings or your parents, right, who you're very close to. Intimate space is between a mother and a child, when a child is infant or very young, or it could be between two married couples, right? So, intimate space is for those which actually you do not allow everyone, but only to some specific people. Artifacts refers to accessories and clothing that reflect a lot about a person's approach to life in general. Like the kind of accessories one uses, the kind of clothes that a person wears, is very clearly reflective of how a person considers himself, the situation around, and life in general. Then chronomics refers to your sense of time. How do you value your own time and other people's time? So for example, like if you receive an email, right? It is not necessary that you should reply then and there, but then care must be taken that the email is replied in the appropriate time, because giving too much of space in replying your email can create misunderstanding. So punctuality plays a very important role in creating your image to the other people. Tactilics, it's touch that convey warmth, affection, and care. There are like social touch and intimate touch. Like social touch could be something that pat someone for their good work, or if someone is sad, you might embrace that person in order to um, give comfort, right? So that is a very important use of tactilics. We often use it in the profession or even in our personal life. And intimate touch is to make someone understand that that person is being loved, and it is between it's between partners, right? People who are very close to one another. However, care must be given that inappropriate and unsolicited touches must be registered and should be reported. Now, the most important topic of today's discussion, barriers to communication. Friends, we have to understand that when we communicate, there are chances that our messages could be misinterpreted and miscommunicated. Why? Because people have different perspective. How I interpret something to be truth could be interpreted by something to be untrue, to be the truth could be very different to that person. So our perspective might be different. So hence we have to take into consideration that people have different perspective. Hence there are high chances that our messages could be misinterpreted and miscommunicated. Hence we have to take care of these following reasons because of which our messages could be misinterpreted. The first is sender-oriented barriers. The sender-oriented barriers will include badly expressed messages. When we want to express something, if that message is not clearly constructed, it could be grammatically, it could be in the manner in which I said, right? I might be, using a lot of foghorns and gambits. Then my message may not be clearly shared with the person to whom I want to, share that message. Loss in transmission. So, for example, like as I'm taking this session online, and suddenly there is a network problem, and then my recording stops. Then what happens? The message will not be transmuted clearly. Or say, for example, like even as I was, expressing something to a friend of mine face to face, and suddenly there was a huge, loud bursting of a tire. Now, what happened? I will also be shocked, that person will also be shocked, and what I was saying, the message will be forgotten for a while. It will take us some time to settle down and then restructure and rephrase my message. Loss in translation and semantic barrier. Loss in translation means when the person do not understand my language and I have to translate the same to my friend in his or her language, then there could be chances of misunderstanding. And semantic barrier, like the meaning could be different. The very best example is if you ever watch YouTube in some foreign language, and YouTube is sort of translating that interview in English. You can see there could be many differences from the original language and how it has been translated. So in such cases, some important meanings could be misinterpreted. Too much of information or too less of information can hinder an effective communication. And attitude also plays a very important role. If I say things only about myself and do not pay attention to what others have to say, not that, but also if I do not allow anybody else to talk, then it can also stop further communication. It can stop the entire conversational practice or the process. Prejudices. It could be prejudices of color, gender, sexual orientation, then social and economic class. All these things can create biases and prejudices. Even pronunciation sometimes create some kind of biases, and we do not like to listen to the person because the person's pronunciation is highly accented. So that can create hindrance in the smooth flow of effective communication. Unclear speech and unclear thought. When we are not clear about what we want to express, our speech will also be not clear. Hence, it is important that we have a clear thought about the purpose of communication and how do we address that. Then receiver-oriented barrier. Now, mostly we miss out some important information because we do not listen carefully. And it also occurs because of inattentive listening. And sometimes this kind of inattentive listening occurs because of the tendency to evaluate. Like I talked about the pronunciation part. Sometimes, we pay attention so much to the wrong pronunciation. And we say, like, oh my God, look at the pronunciation. What is he saying? But instead of doing that, if we pay attention to what the person is trying to tell, that will be more beneficial, right? So tendency to evaluate and interest and attitude. So for example, if I have to attend to something, to a seminar which does not interest me or of which I do not have any other previous knowledge, then it could hamper my interest in that communication process. So at the very beginning it must be clear. I must clearly inform the person that I do not have any knowledge about a particular topic. So when the communication starts, the persons can switch on to a very simple manner of explaining some complex issues or complex issues about the topic. Then it might generate my interest gradually and it can change my attitude. But if my attitude, like I said, prejudices is also a part of the attitude. If my attitude is biased towards certain group of people, certain communities, I will never be able to communicate with those people. Resistance to change, again, that is also a part of attitude. If I'm not ready or to adapt to the changing environment, to the changing leadership, then also communication will be very difficult. And last but not the least, if I'm prejudiced, I would not like to listen to what the person is telling to me, right? I'm not ready to listen to anything, even if the content would be very useful to me, but still I will not listen to that person. This can create huge obstacle in understanding what the person wants to say. Hence, in order to develop our communication skills in a very effective way, we have to take care of the 7 C's of communication. And they are clear. We have to be very clear about the goal and purpose of our communication. We have to be concise, that is to be to the point. We have to be concrete, very clear, and not ambiguous or fudgy, and give as much as the detail is required. Not too much of detail. Too much of detail can sometimes hamper our listening. Then correct. Before sharing any information, we have to ensure that the information or message is correct and it is presented correctly, grammatically, or even the word choice. Word choice again is very important. And we have to be coherent, ensure that the fluidity of message is arranged in a very logical order. We have to also keep in mind that the message which we send is complete and there is no ambiguity. Remember, as we know that communication can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. We have to keep in mind that there is no space for ambiguous messages. It has to be very clear, courteous. We have to maintain politeness in tone and the word choice. Thank you so much for listening to me.